wastewater study that AE2S did presented to us last month. And you had then, Dale, presented to the council our recommendation? No?
No,
No.
no.
Okay.
So I think that was pending the, this meeting today, what the
Okay.
recommendation actually was, because I don't think there was coming out of this committee last time. And it's not for me to project what came out of there, but it seemed like the folks were interested in another meeting to be able to digest what was discussed last time, so.
So last time, you want to look at Dell's initial packet, the main alternatives that we looked at, I guess, are on page 8, 9, and 10, were the considerations and the alternatives that he had given for us to look at. And I think, Trudy, help me if I misspeak, but we had kind of looked and decided that a combination.
In my mind, some of us were for long-term alternative 2B, which included WRT, and then there was also a conclusion saying long-term alternative 2C, and the difference being RO, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we had taken a look at all of them, and
If I could also add in too, if everyone remembers, we could include long range, the RO on this, leaving the garage door open, so to speak, or the platform there, or RO down the road, or vice versa down the road.
right. So,
You know, what I could do is I could just review this quickly so that people around who are new to the JSON
Okay.
and
that would be,
how would
Sure.
that, if I just go through the long-term alternatives, we
Yes.
can talk through
Sure.
that. So there were two different sources. Regionally, the regional water sources really didn't pan out for this planning period for the first few years. I would say for the first 15 or 20 in terms of developing the connection that you need to connect to Minnehaha community or the city of Sioux Falls. And there, of course, are connecting with Lewis and Clark. And so we had a short-term alternative that we evaluated. In fact, let me just back up here. So the short-term alternative that was offered by Minnehaha community was for a 5-year duration with a maximum daily flow of 250,000 gallons per day. And so to have a basis on which to compare that, we compared that with other ways for Brandon to get more water. And so one alternative was to pipe well 3 to the water treatment plant and treat that water. It's an existing well that the city owns. Number 3 is utilize well 7. Infrastructure's in place. It needs to be connected, and I would say the valve needs to be opened from my perspective to enable that to flow to the treatment plant. Alternative 4 was to treat for radium at well 7, and at that time we talked about the WRT process. That's a radium removal technology that actually is used in New Underwood, South Dakota, successfully. And so they create this radium-specific media that absorbs the radium, and they change out that media periodically and then haul it off and replace it. So it's what I would say would be a disposable media technology.
And it's done at the well site.
There's a place, you can choose where you do it. Our vision was to do it at the well site, but the final design consideration of where exactly that place would be could be there, it could be at the treatment plant. You know, the cost would be marginally different.
and
Right.
at the end of the meeting, we had kind of decided that it might be better to have that at the treatment facility as a separate building onto the treatment facility, just in case we needed to pipe in from other places that had radium. It wouldn't have to go to well 7 first and then come in.
And I would say, you know,
So-
let that decision be made as a part of
Yeah.
the design consideration. I wouldn't say that it's something you need to decide.
Right.
The cost of that technology would be similar no matter where you place it,
Yeah.
right? And then finally, well 9 was being investigated at that time, and the idea would be to go ahead and finish construction of that and connect it to the treatment plant. So those were the three alternatives, all of which would enable Brandon to meet a short-term water demand goal for the next 5 years. And any of those alternatives could do that. And we had costs associated with that, and it turns out that compared to the existing system, alternatives 2, 3, and 5 were similar cost. Purchasing Minnehaha Community Water at $2 a thousand would raise the cost of water to this level, assuming the trend of current water use. And then finally, the WRT at well 7 would be an elevated cost as well. WRT takes the radium down to near zero. You know, that's their guarantee, is that that radium concentration leaving that treatment process is less than the MCL, but that would only occur, it would rise to that level toward the end of the life of the media, and early on in the media life it would be much less than that. So anyway, those were the short-term alternatives, and I think where you were headed with this was that the feeling was that the Minnehaha community, for the investment that you put in it, had a value such that you lose the salvage value of what you put in the ground at the end of 5 years.
It was such a short-term
Yeah.
solution that for the cost, we didn't think that
Yeah.
it warranted a big topic of discussion.
So I guess the other way to think about it is, you know, the pipe is still there, even though Minnehaha community said this is 5 years and that's it. You know, who knows what will happen in the next 5 years, but we had to go on the basis of their saying it's a 5-year deal, and there's no further guarantee after 5 years.
Yeah, which that'd be right.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if you want to pursue that any further. Those are all short-term alternatives, and the idea is that some of these short-term alternatives play into a long-term solution, like connecting well 3 into the facility, utilizing well 7 in whatever way you determine to use it. The infrastructure you put in place that you buy to connect those gives you a long-term solution as well.
Do we have an idea of how much capacity we would expect from well number 9?
Well, number 9 isn't really viable at this point in time. Test came back 75 gallons a minute. They had some problems getting through gravel and rock, and so we didn't even test pump it for the 32-hour test pump because it was well below what we were hoping.
So it's a small amount of water in a different, well, the same aquifer as well number 1, but such a small amount, it's not really going to move the needle much on it.
It's not, and then, you know, the big question with well number 9, at least in my mind, was always the pond.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it going to be under the direct influence of surface water? My guess, I'm not a hydrologist, geologist, engineer. My guess is that it probably would be a minimum. That's something I don't think we want to
Right.
get into.
And so that's new news after we had the meeting last time. It's like,
Okay.
yeah.
So we aren't even pursuing well 9 right now?
Nope.
Okay.
So that one drops out of consideration here. Okay. You want me to jump into the long term?
Sure.
Yep. So we've got 2 sources that were evaluated. One's the Big Sioux Aquifer, and one was Split Rock Creek Aquifer. And last time we went through some of the hydrogeological conclusions that were made by WSP. And I know there was a concern raised about recharge. My suspicion is to both aquifers, but specifically to Split Rock Creek. And so in answer to that question of, you know, what about available recharge, our recommendation is to engage WSP for the second level of their study, in which they were to determine more closely what that recharge looks like. And so, you know, that question came up several times during the last meeting. And from our perspective, their preliminary conclusion is that the recharge is there. But if the city is intending to look at that as a long-term source, in our original proposal, our team proposed a 2-phased approach. Initially look at, is it feasible? What does it look like? And then if it is, and the city chooses to go in that direction, the recommendation is to engage a second level of, I would say, fine-tuning the study to better understand what's there.
Can you
Okay.
walk me through that study very simply? I mean, I think of the aquifer and I'm like, just the way that it's set up, it just seems to me like that'd be a process, and even the best data we're still not guaranteed.
Yep. I guess I would say that the process enables them to more better to understand the math of what's going on
It's
there.
estimation.
Yeah. Understand the math of the aquifer. It would be more of a numerical model of the aquifer with additional attention to, from my perspective or from my understanding, drought and recharge. So whereas they have completed at this point what they call a hydrological conceptual model, utilizing existing data. And again, you know, I'm not Mitch Canterbury, so I don't know the details of what that all would include. And my suspicion is that the exact scope of that study actually would be impacted by what they discovered in this first round. But the idea would be for the city to have a higher degree of understanding of the long-term viability of that aquifer.
Do you know what the duration of a study like that is?
I think he was saying a quarter of a year, 3 months, 6 months, somewhere in that range, less than a year. I'm thinking back to the original scope that was developed, and it seems to me that that number comes to mind. So, you know, I'm not sure. Again, I just don't have the scope in mind. So that's the what I can recall. There are some other things that can happen while that's going on that help enable the city to pursue that. We talk about in the conclusions here some potential pilot studies, some potential work with DENR on water rights and so forth. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. Sorry, I don't have that scope and cost and everything in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
remember looking at the math, you know, these well sites are all over, they've been monitored for
Yeah.
a period of years. And I didn't know if it was just, you know, all the data was there, they just need to go through it, or
Yeah.
are we talking that they're gonna go and do additional, you know, well sites or test wells or?
Yeah, my recollection was that they weren't going to do a significant full-scale test hole and all that kind of thing. Okay, so anyway, there was those two sources. The Big Sioux is the other one. In both of those cases, they identified locations for potential wells. Their estimation was that the Big Sioux was unable to meet the entire demand, that there would need to be additional Split Rock Creek water. This Big Sioux in the area they evaluated didn't have enough productivity to meet the entire demand of the treatment plant. So in the future, the Big Sioux alternative included 5 wells total in the Big Sioux aquifer, plus additional source from the Split Rock Creek. So those became the 2 source alternatives. And then for treatment options, there were 4 different levels. One is simply to continue on with the existing process, utilizing HMO and the IMAR media for iron and manganese removal and radium removal, and build onto the treatment plant to meet the future demands. Option B was to continue with that, but add WRT at well number 7. Well number 7 has quite a bit higher radionuclides than the other Split Rock Creek wells, and so to focus on that and provide some reliability in terms of radionuclides. The other water quality in well 7 is similar, I would say, to the other wells in the Split Rock Creek. Option C would be to continue with the existing process, but utilize reverse osmosis to treat a portion of that filtered water and then blend it back together to achieve a treated water hardness that's similar to what the neighboring communities are. So essentially that would cut the hardness in about a half. Okay? And then the last option was to do both WRT at well number 7 and reverse osmosis to treat, to get the hardness to where it would be. So in terms of degrees of treatment, as you progress from A through D, increasing degree of treatment, better water quality, as you continue to add those treatment effects.
The HMO system that was in, we talked about radium removal with that. In this WRT, we'd have to go to that because the HMO couldn't handle the additional capacity.
Nope, no, it was just additional assurance, so it's like a dual barrier.
Okay,
You're
okay.
taking
So the
care of
idea
well
is-
7, taking well 7 and going, we're going to handle well 7. It's a well that's been developed, it's ready to go, and to handle some of the concerns about radionuclides, here's an additional treatment process for well 7 to take the radium out of it.
Yeah.
Bring that water to the treatment plant, blend it with other ones, continue to use the HMO IMAR media for polishing, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, but the idea is one will get us below standards and one will basically eliminate the radium. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yes.
the WRT, well, I have to be careful. The WRT folks says you will meet the drinking water standards. But in the discussion with them, that's sort of like your water softener. When you refresh your water softener, you get zero hardness coming out of it as long as you're loading it correctly. Toward the end, you start to bleed hardness through in a normal water softening system. And the same thing occurs with this system. Toward the end, the radionuclides might bounce off of near zero, but be less than the drinking water standard. So their claim to fame is it'll always be less than the drinking water standard, but as it was explained to me, initially when you start the new with fresh media, you end up with really low concentrations of radionuclides coming out lower than the drinking water standard. So they set up their maintenance agreements to refresh the media before it exceeds the drinking water standard. So you're going from 20 down to less than 5.
But the plan was to be under less than 5 with HMO.
Correct.
So I'm just, I'm
So what this
I'm
does-
not questioning the need.
Yeah.
What I'm questioning is how do we best still build upon that and say, well, we had something that, I don't think that we maybe tested it to the fullest, maybe we have, but, that system was going to get us to this, but we're going to use this as just additional precautionary. And I don't know what the cost difference of it is, but,
That's,
if the other one got me down to underneath, I'm okay with that
yeah.
and not adding the additional cost.
And so, that's a great opinion. I would recognize that opinion, but there are other opinions that say, man, well 7 is really
I get it.
a strong well. And so what we were trying to offer as an alternative to just treatment option A, which is what you're saying, here's option A, it's existing process, is alternative B, a double barrier for well 7, right?
And was that WRT station going to be right at well 7, or did we talk about moving the WRT to the
Yep.
water treatment
Yeah.
plant? And so
Yeah,
maybe-
that's
And I think that makes the most sense. And like
Yeah.
you said, if you have
It's-
another well that you develop and need to run it through,
Right.
yeah.
It's a matter of efficiency and how does the HMO process work the best and cost effectiveness associated with that. So it's just a matter of how, and again, this comes to design, the most cost-effective approach to utilizing that technology and where it should be landed. To me, is just a part of design. In order to cost evaluate it,
So when we're talking.
we did it at the well.
So when we're talking dollars and cents, is it 50 cents on a per thousand? Is it $1?
Yep. So
I apologize that if I'm going back in
That's
time.
good, I'd like to hear.
it's okay. 2B. Okay. So the cost of the WRT process depends upon how much you do. So the more radionuclide you remove or the larger the flow rate, the cheaper is the unit cost. It's just like an economy of scale. You achieve that with this as well. And so we evaluated two different utilizations of well number 7. 2B is what we would say is the low end of utilization of well 7. And then alternative 2B on the right-hand side is a high utilization of well 7. So if you look at the capital costs, go to the bottom part of this and look at WRT at well 7, which is the first row above the gray at the bottom, is $2.7 million for the process, the building, whole 9 yards. Okay? So depending upon how much you use it, if you go up to the O&M costs, there's that WRT service fee. This is a service fee for 20 years worth of utilization. 25 years? Greg, is it 25 years? 25 years. So at the low end of utilization, the service fee is about $900,000 to them for 25 years worth of service. And at the-
renewable,
Say again?
that cost, taking that material after it's done,
Yeah.
just some
Yeah,
disposal.
so this is their maintenance, they're basically, you'd have a maintenance contract with them.
So that's their installation of media and removal of media.
Yeah, and monitoring.
And the monitoring.
This one also includes them coming to visit the site on a periodic basis to do their operational maintenance is what it would be, okay? So, and if you look at the cost per 1,000 gallons, which some people are tending to do, on a cost per 1,000 gallons, it ranged between, was it $1.20 per 1,000 to $1.60 per 1,000, depending upon utilization, right?
So that's a big chunk then.
It's, yeah. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we talked about last week was perception. And using well 7's water, having that perception that we're treating it down to zero before it reaches the plant. Even though the HMO media is designed to get that down to under drinking water standards and blending, we would be well within the guidelines. But I think this was more of an addressing perception. Plus the fact that the water tests, when we test it when it comes out, Raleigh, correct me if I'm wrong, but they take like 3 months to get back. So we could be using, if for some reason we had an error in our calculations and we were actually sending out higher radium in the water with just the HMO process, we wouldn't know that for 3 months.
Right.
So I think this was more of a safeguard. We're treating everything for radium, perception that it's down to zero before it even gets to the plant. Then it goes through the HMO process to catch anything remaining, plus then we blending it, and it would be well below the drinking water standards.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, we were here because of some of that. I mean, that's why
That perception.
the thing was started.
Mhm.
But that, when you're talking a third of your rate, you know, and I said, I mean, I said from the very beginning, I mean, I was fine with the HMO system if it took it down, and so, I mean, it's just
It's a big chunk.
yeah, but I agree, I mean, we gotta change that perception, but, you know, my question was, well, can we tell people it's zero, and we can't, and so, you know, so it's two, you know, obviously two's better than four, but, you know, what are we really telling them that we're doing different? We're just saying, well, there's a lot higher percentage chance that there's less.
The other consideration with the WRT is the radium is getting captured by the media, and then the company is taking that media and replacing it and disposing of it as part of their service fee, as opposed to having to deal with that
Us disposing
in
it and
the
trying to,
backwash.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
Yep.
great, but I mean, for the people that are out there getting the water, they don't really care how you get rid of it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's all a big educational thing.
Yeah.
That is going to be the hardest part, I think, just to get that information out there so everyone can understand.
Mhm.
I don't need
Sure.
to hijack the presentation, I just,
No. Contributing. So the third option was the RO idea. And so we're utilizing the existing treatment process with HMO and IMAR, and then taking a part of that water and treating it to remove hardness from the water so that it's equivalent to the neighboring systems. And so that second bullet, that those options enable adjusting the hardness and TDS to match neighboring systems. About 200 milligrams per liter of hardness, whereas right now you're about 400 milligrams per liter.
no, believe me, I know.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Yep, so that's going to help you, it would, for a homeowner that's using softening, decrease their salt consumption by half. Yep.
Yeah, so
Pay for
then,
it in the water.
but they'll pay for it in the water charges. So that was the other part of the discussion with RO, was that it was
Usually
going to
is.
increase the bill about $120 a year, and were people actually going to save $120 a year in salt?
Right.
How many bags you use?
$12 a month.
I don't
Go
know how
through
much
5
it
bags
is.
a month, so that'd be $12 a month in
You're
savings.
kidding.
So that's 140 bucks.
5 bags? 5 40-pound bags? I pay $5 a bag for
Yeah,
those.
$5 a bag. So
Yeah, so
25
half of that?
So $25 a month, you're gonna cut it in half, that's $12 a month.
There you go.
So if I'm paying 120, you know, so I don't, I guess for me, it won't change anything.
Yeah, do you have stock in the salt company?
Clearly run out.
Okay, so
I should.
we then talked about costs a bit and tried to create a bar graph that compared the costs of these. And so if you look at the capital improvements associated with each of these alternatives, you have A, B, C, and D. And if you consider the Split Rock Creek, you're on the 2 series. Number 1 is Big Sioux Aquifer with some supplemental water from the Split Rock Creek. And then alternative 2 is not considering the Big Sioux Aquifer and going to the Split Rock Creek only. And so 2A and B, A is using existing treatment, B is doing that plus WRT. And these are the capital costs here. And so 2B and 2B2 are the same because it's the same WRT. And then 2C is RO, and 2D is RO plus WRT. So then if you look at the O&M, and that's annual, this would be the annual payment on capital improvement. This is the annual O&M cost associated with that. So if you look here, for example, and look at the 2 series, you can see it just steps up depending upon how much you use. So the sum of those 2 is where you're coming to looking at what would be the annual O&M plus capital cost. And so there you can see that 2C and 2B2 compete with each other. This would be 2B2, which is utilizing WRT and utilizing well 7 quite a bit. So your service charge is quite a bit for that. Compares with 2C. 2B itself, utilizing the well, I would say on the lower end, well number 7, cuts down the O&M cost for that quite a bit.
So I have a question, and you guys may have discussed this because I'm seeing that 2B and 2C is the recommendation, but why not 1B?
Okay, so one.
Cost-wise, I mean, it
So-
seems more diversified to me.
Yep, that's a great question, you know, and from the perspective of the costs for developing a well in the Big Sioux Aquifer per unit amount of water you get from it,
Yeah,
it has a higher cost per unit amount of water that you get. But the diversity enables you to say, all right, I have one well in the Big Sioux Aquifer that might get me 150 gallons a minute versus a well that I have in the Split Rock Creek that gives me 1,000 gallons per minute. So I have to put in about 5 of those Big Sioux Aquifer wells to give me the same amount of productivity that I would get from Split Rock Creek.
I get that, but as far as the calculations all go, they're pretty similar. 1B and 2B are cost-wise similar, and O&M costs are less. So that's why I was curious why we wouldn't want to diversify more for the same cost.
Oh, 1B and 2B.
B.
2B
1B and 2B,
look about the same.
yes.
Yep. 1B is just a little more.
Yeah,
Without,
but that's 2B2 is much higher, so I'm again wondering why we wouldn't want to go do the Big Sioux with it.
Yeah.
Are these not apples to apples as far as how much water we'd actually be getting from?
They're
the
all
diverse-
apples to apples in
Okay.
terms of the availability of water. Absolutely. And, you know, it gets back to the value for, you know, what you're putting into it. And in addition to that, there's the non-cost considerations. So if we go back and look at these rankings. So we did the KT analysis, went through all of that. And if you look at the composite ranking of these, and this is considering a whole bunch of things, stakeholder acceptance, treatment operations, system operations, and implementation, and underneath those, a bunch of categories. And we, you, at the development committee level ranked those, and then we went and scored all of those alternatives against those. And so here you can see the comparison, and if you look at the composite rank, the upper box talks about low well usage, and the lower box talks about high well usage. And so if you look at the upper box, 2A and 2B rank the highest. And if you look at the lower box, 2A ranked the highest and 1A ranked second. Okay, but then if you look at the second row where it says KT performance score, then you see 2B and 2A and 2D sort of, I'm sorry, I'm in the upper box now where you have low well usage. See 2B at 1.16, and then 2D at 1.10, and then 2A and 2C sort of at 1.08. And if you compare that with the scores over there to the left-hand side, you see about, I'd say maybe 700ths higher. Now you think, well, that's just 700ths, but when you look at all of the factors that contribute to the KT ranking, in the opinion of the committee that did the ranking, going to the Split Rock Creek option ranked higher,
Just doing Split
considering
Rock.
all of those factors, right? So, the point is, yes, you could go to the Big Sioux Aquifer and get more water, but it's, in terms of the cost for buying that water and how much you get out of it, you still can't get all of the water there. In
Right.
addition to that, the locations for those wells that were identified by WSP are in town.
Yep.
So we looked at various places where those wells could be located, and we're almost there. Okay, so right here. Again, they recommended these locations. There was no communication, no purchase of land. It was just an idea that enabled us to come up with a cost. And so we're in town north of Holly. Is that Holly Boulevard?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 3 of those wells are right at Holly or north. And then well 9 actually was included on here, and that didn't turn out to be very successful.
I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting, so you may have already probably gone through all
Yeah.
of this stuff. But, so we're not concerned about overusing Split Rock Creek if we're just going there now?
Yeah, well, that certainly is a legitimate,
Which is where the study for the
Consideration.
recharge comes into.
that's a legitimate consideration.
Okay.
And so
We got
WSP
that.
indicated, here's a
Okay.
range of water you can get from the Split Rock Creek. And so this is their range, 940 to 5,600 gallon per minute. Big range because
Yeah.
of the range in transmissivity values. It's a characteristic of the aquifer. And so they said, it's a pretty large range.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Big Sioux, about 195 to 750 gallons per minute in the area that they felt was the best
Oh,
place
that's
to
all.
get water from
Okay.
the Big Sioux.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So quite a bit less yield.
Yeah.
There still is something to be said about diversity. In fact, our encouragement for Brandon is always seek diversity,
Right.
especially in the future. And to that end, continue on with conversations with Lewis and Clark and Minnehaha community and so forth. But it's a matter of, if you look to the near term and look at the availability of water from the sources that you have and access to those, and what does that all mean relative to a plan moving forward? From the perspective of the committee that did the KT analysis on the non-cost impacts of those, as well as the cost evaluation, the focus became to look at the Split Rock Creek. All predicated on, getting some assurance through additional study from WSP that yes, this is good value going there. Okay?
Yep.
This is a great question, and another way to address that diversity for almost the same amount is to go ahead and get 250,000 gallons a day from Minnehaha community. You know, that's about the same as the Big Sioux Aquifer when it comes down to it.
Except then,
But we
you know,
could do
don't-
it forever.
You can
as
do that for
opposed
5
to
years.
5 years.
And then,
No, that's the MCWC, not the
Yeah.
pulling from the Big Sioux. That one we could do the minimal amount, but we could do it forever.
Right,
Right.
right.
un- until the wells decide to give up.
Right.
I mean, you've been in the Big Sioux Aquifer with 5 wells, 4 of which aren't being used anymore.
Right?
So, and I don't want to cast a negative light on the Big Sioux Aquifer. There are places around eastern South Dakota where it is very productive and very fertile. And Sioux Falls and Minnehaha community are a testament to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that in this area, in the region that was studied by WSP, the productivity seems to be less. It's not an easy decision to make, you know, and so from looking at the WSP work and looking at the availability of water, we needed to make at a high level, a planning level recommendation.
Mhm.
So that's where we went.
Dale, could you
How am I doing
also-
to your question?
You're doing good.
Okay, yeah.
Could you also talk a little bit more about the RO system and the amount of water that it would take, how much water it was just?
Yep.
Yes.
So you would end up Greg, what was the amount, the percentage of RO that would go, the bypass stream that would go through RO, what percentage of the total, was it half? Okay, so about half of the water that was treated by the plant would go through the RO. 25%, okay, so let's just say you bring in 1,000 gallons per minute to the treatment plant. 500 of gallons per minute of that would go through RO to be further treated for hardness removal. The treated water from that would be blended back in to the water coming into the plant to cut its hardness in half, right? And so then the rest of the water, there's a concentrate discharged from the RO that contains all the minerals that were rejected by the RO, and that would be discarded to a receiving stream. So if you look at that concentrate relative to the raw water coming in, it's about 10%, roughly, right? Yep. So about 10% of the raw water goes to a discharge point. We'll just call it that.
So 5%.
That's the fact of life using RO.
Got it.
In your home, when you use RO, it's probably 90% of the water goes to the waste and 10%. So on a municipal scale, it's more efficient.
Yeah.
Okay? Was that the question that you had? So going with an RO option discards some of the raw water, right? But it provides a better water quality to the customers.
And it's also quite, using more water.
It does use more water. That's the reality of going with RO.
And I wouldn't
It's
know if
more
this-
cost-effective from the perspective of capital and O&M cost as compared to a precipitation softening, a lime softening facility. A lime softening facility would recover more water, but it would be more expensive for you to make the water. So you always have that balance between how much water is available, where does it go, and that kind of thing.
So we
And-
also had the conversation of, in an age where we're trying to conserve water, is it realistic to just automatically discard 10% of the water coming into the plant when we're trying to encourage everybody else to conserve water? So that was
Isn't it-
brought up too.
Isn't it 5% of the water coming into the plant? Because it's 10% of the 500,000, right?
No, no, it's
If you actually
10%.
look at
It's-
the long-term alternatives,
Yeah.
It's,
1C, you see a difference between the plant capacity
Yep.
and a water source capacity. So, for instance, in 2045, we would need 4.5 million gallons of source capacity, but we'd get 3.8 million gallons of treatment capacity.
Okay.
out of it.
Yep.
So,
10%, gotcha.
so that was a concern, just to let you know what was talked about last
Yeah.
time, that was also brought
Okay.
up.
But the opposite to that is it's a lot more efficient to do it in big scale than it is for, 50 households more to have it at home.
right.
But you still can't get rid of your water softener at home.
No, but
So-
that's not getting rid of
No.
like RO.
No.
And so when we're talking long-term, we went and, we sourced two aquifers We've talked about Lewis and Clark, potential upgrades there. So how come those aren't here?
They are in the recommendations. So when you look in here, go to the long-term
Yeah,
improvement
improvement conclusions.
conclusions. So there's two parts to this. One is the recommendation is to focus on the Split Rock Creek, engage the WSP quantitative model before design to understand and get reliability data or information about that. Then the recommendation was to consider alternatives B or C to achieve some of the higher quality, I guess you'd call it desires of the community. And that's really a policy decision, right? Then in terms of additional recommendations, one is to consider the
Okay.
regional
That was
source.
my question, so
Yeah,
it's
so
post.
post 2045.
So we take this plan through 2045, and that's,
Yeah. Well, between now and 2045, you're engaging those guys because they're, part of the discussion, we talked about this last time, was that Lewis and Clark, that community of systems is considering the next phase of Lewis and Clark. And there's opportunities for the member systems to bring on additional customers, just like those systems have done all the way along. Rural water systems are continually adding customers.
To be involved in this
They
conversation.
haven't invited us yet, but the discussions.
I know that they've had a
to us,
meeting. Yeah.
They've indicated they'll invite us
Yeah.
at the appropriate time.
Okay. We don't know that appropriate time.
No.
Well, the executive director, Troy Larson, said, we're very interested in including Brandon in these discussions. And he said, we will invite Brandon to the next discussions that they've had. So my assumption is they haven't had those discussions yet,
Right.
or he hasn't invited Brandon. So,
no, I'm sure they have.
yeah. So, but it was very straightforward in the discussion, talking about, the activities of the members and what they're thinking about and so forth. And so, to your question, our encouragement to Brandon is stay engaged with Minnehaha community, the city of Sioux Falls, and Lewis and Clark to keep those future water source options open. Minnehaha community and Sioux Falls will need to identify long-term options as well. And it turns out that it's pretty cost-effective as a community to do that as a group. That's how regional water systems seem to grow. One of the things they mentioned was it's pretty likely they will not get federal funding for this, and so it's going to be more of what you'd call a self-funded approach. But still, economies of scale help you win in terms of comparing that with a smaller system idea. So it's a recommendation.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially the data just wasn't there for you to get to a number, get to a cost value from them because you don't know what.
That's correct. They're in the beginning stages of trying to understand what that is. And of course, their costs are depending upon how big it is, where it comes from, all that kind of thing.
So you mentioned leaving the door open. So like if you did 2B and you could still then add RO in at a later time,
Right.
that's an option?
Yes, so what we had talked about last week was building the shell, the outside building, and having the garage door that you could use the building for other purposes, and when you were ready to add the RO process, then you just put it in,
Yep.
put it in the building.
So there's some design associated
So
with that.
That would all come
Yeah.
with the design, so it isn't something that we would have to solidify or do right away.
So is this building separate from what we're talking about for
It's-
that medium for the well
Yes.
7 outside?
Yes,
It's different than that?
it's a different, yes.
Okay.
It's all a function of the design.
Gotcha.
You can put all of that in the same building if
Yep.
you'd like,
Yeah.
or depending upon how urgently you want to go at well number 7 and do WRT there.
That.
It's just a matter of the design process and deciding how that is. Cost-wise, at the high level cost estimating that we're doing, to estimate and compare these costs, it sort of merges together depending on where WRT is, whether it's there or it's over here. Those costs sort of
Right.
merge together.
Right.
The point is that we were talking about is that if there is potential for RO to be included, you still have the base level treatment plant that's being built to do HMO and IMAR, and filtration associated with that, aeration associated with that. The reverse osmosis equipment can be located in a segment of that building. And as long as the hydraulics of the system is set up to engage that and do the pumping that's necessary to make that all happen, the RO systems can be brought in on a skid, set on the floor, connected, and installed and run. So you see this a lot in RO plants where they're building for expansion. And you see a garage door and the guys are parking trucks in there, or they're doing, not necessarily parking trucks or cleaning deer or things like that, but they're utilizing that facility for other purposes until such time as they need to engage the rest of the facility for RO.
If you're paying generally the same, at your house to get softer water versus going to the RO, I mean, why would we push going to the RO? I mean, that way, if we go to RO, everybody has to pay for it. If we leave it at their home, they get the decision line.
Right.
I may,
But if leaving the door open is literally putting a garage door and adding
Oh,
this
yeah.
much extra
Yeah,
space,
I
that's a
have
good
no issues
idea,
with
right?
Yeah.
At some point in time, it
Yeah.
might be a lot cheaper, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right?
and that's what we kind of talked about last week, is just maybe not, sorry, I thought I put that on vibrate. Just not utilizing it right now, but planning for it in the future, in case we, maybe, if that was something. And then you have to look at if we decide to do, Lewis and Clark, if we happen to get in that, and that is already softened water, we can blend it with ours, and then we're doing the same thing. So maybe we wouldn't need it in the future or Minnehaha County water or whatever. If you bring in soft water to blend with ours, you're basically doing the same thing. Maybe we wouldn't need the RO process. So, I think leaving the door open is what we decided, or talked about last week, that would maybe be the best plan of option.
Is there anything else RO does? Just a byproduct of it? Does RO do something else that is benefit to our system that?
It removes radionuclides, it removes hardness, it removes sulfate, right? And so pretty much any anion or cation except sodium and chloride are removed to a very high degree of percent removal.
Okay.
Sodium and chloride are removed to a fairly high degree of removal, but there's still a little bit of that left. So the total dissolved solids of RO treated water would be less than 25.
Is that over and above what the HMO is already
Yes. In addition to.
In addition
to what
So
the HMO
the
does.
part of the water that goes through RO will have some additional radionuclide barrier. It'll have hardness barrier. It'll have sulfate barrier.
Nitrate barrier, if we did end up dealing with
Yep,
big soup.
that's
used?
correct.
But then that's going to all be blended in with the other water.
Mhm.
And so, I'm not quite seeing the big benefit of the RO, this amount of water blended in.
Yep.
That.
So it's a matter of improving
Makes
water
water
quality
better.
compared to
Yeah.
what you have right now.
Right.
Right now, there really is no removal of most of the dissolved solids, like hardness and sulfate and nitrate or whatever, that just goes through the plant. The benefit of the existing process is to remove radionuclides and to remove iron and manganese. So the iron and manganese takes the red and the black out of the water, and the radionuclide removal, of course, takes away this unseen gift that you have, right? So the remaining part of the stuff that's in the water that you can't see is, what can be troublesome to some folks. There's hardness there, there's sulfate there, these other dissolved solids. And by utilizing RO, you're removing those dissolved solids. So from that perspective, then, your treated water is going to have that water quality improvement. And it's just a matter of, how does that affect me as a customer? Well, you might see less incrustation, less buildup on the ends of faucets or on leaky things. You'll see that if you don't have a softener in your home, you'll see less buildup of hardness inside your water heater because of the fact that the precipitated hardness is now building up in your water heater. So if you do your home softening, well, that prevents that from happening as well. So it's just a matter of, in terms of I guess I would say if you're thinking about trying to communicate with folks about what the benefits of this technology would be, it is to improve the water quality, to remove dissolved solids, to lower the hardness of water, so that you have a better water quality at your home. If you're satisfied with your water quality at your home, then you may be less willing to pay for an improved water quality. You know, if you compare Brandon with the surrounding communities that are served by Sioux Falls or served by Minnehaha community, your water quality is, I would say, about, how can I say this, twice as hard is the best way to say it, right? And so they have the benefit of softer water. And that's really the main thing, is the hardness of the
So
water.
I have a question then. So bringing me back to layman, so from where we're at right now to the 2B, is our water the same? Are we already doing the HMO followed by IMR filter media? Do we already do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So 2B is same quality that we have right now, just fixing capacity.
No, 2B,
No.
2A. 2A is the
That's
same as
2A.
what you have right now.
Okay, sorry, yep, because
2B is
well
WRT,
7 is to
well
add the
7.
WRT
yeah.
to well 7,
That's 2B.
which is just for radiant.
Yes.
So quality was, okay, so the quality then with the hardness and everything else is the same,
Yes.
but we are
That's correct.
taking well 7 into account and getting rid of that radium before it even hits the plant.
Yeah. Can you go back to one more slide that we had way at the beginning of this, just to illustrate this water quality question, because I want to make sure that you understand what this is. So here we have Lewis and Clark, Sioux Falls, Minnehaha Community, and Brandon.
Mhm.
So there you can see that the total dissolved solids for Brandon is 570, and depending on the source, it ranges between 350 and 490. So the question would be, well, where are those total dissolved solids coming from? Well, if you look at Brandon's sulfate, it's like 190, MCWC 180, Sioux Falls 200, Lewis and Clark 273. It's all a function of where their wells are at. If you look at the total hardness, you see Brandon at 390, and everybody else, well, depending on, you know, the source, but Lewis and Clark's at 172. Okay, about 200, you know, rounded off, right? So roughly half of what Brandon is. And alkalinity is much lower in those other ones as well. And so if you look at the impact of this on the fixtures in your home and that kind of thing, because of the lower concentrations of these constituents, they'll have less impact on your fixtures and less salt required. So the numbers are there. That's what the numbers say. And I think it's just a matter of quality of life. What does that really mean in order to convince a voter, a customer, that yes, it's worth going to the softer idea to engage the RO part of it. Really, that's really what it will do, is give you lower
And it's all going to
TDS.
come down to the cost. I mean, it's.
But I definitely,
trying to
that's why
convince them.
keeping the RO, you know, open as an idea is smart, because if we end up using well 7 a lot more, I mean, that's cost prohibitive. We could just do the RO. I mean, when you look at that 2B2, if you're on
Yep.
The high
the
cost,
slides,
the high
yeah,
usage.
they're the same, or darn near.
That would be utilizing well 7 to its
A lot.
fullest extent.
Right.
Grace?
Yes.
So
But if we
that's
needed to do
running
that,
at
then
full
that's
blast.
when we should be doing RO, because the cost is there, similar. So then you bring it in, right?
Certainly would be an option.
Okay.
Again, you know, Jason, what we were trying to do is provide alternative levels of treatment to enable Brandon to make a choice,
I think you did a good job.
right?
It's a lot of choices.
Okay, so in the end, another, and this is to get to the cost.
Yeah, show the grid.
Yeah, okay,
payment grid.
went too far, oh, shoot.
Just one question. For 2A, does 2A have WRTE?
No, that's the
Okay,
B.
so that's the only one that doesn't.
That's why it's the,
Or I mean, out of the twos anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you go to the end, it drops you out.
look at this.
So this then becomes a rate discussion.
The rates,
Yep.
yes.
So this is a slide we had last time that talked about the impact of this on rates over time. So all the alternatives are up there, and this rate would be the rate impact of just building these alternatives onto the existing rate that you have right now. The black line at the bottom is showing 2.5% inflation rate on the rate. So if you just accounted for inflation, cost of living for making water, that's what that would be. And then the next one up there, well, it just sort of goes up depending upon what's the alternative. You may be able to see this better if you looked at it on your handout there, or maybe not. But the point is that the more intensive your treatment, the higher the cost. No surprise. The thing that this rate doesn't say is what happens when you include in some of the other things that Brandon is considering doing. Right? And so after we had the meeting with the committee last time, we talked, had a meeting with the Brandon staff to try and understand what are some additional things that Brandon's considering doing and how will that influence anything. So this plot is what's a simplification of what the rate impact is on how much you're going to finance of whatever capital improvement that you do. And you can see right now that the Brandon rate can actually finance some additional improvements. If you look at the bottom line, the blue line, you can see that there's space in the current Brandon rate to actually do some improvements. It's the simplified analysis that we did. The upper line, and the two lines are reflecting different O&M costs. So the lower line might be just moving on with what you have right now, fairly low source treatment cost. And the upper line represent a really high source and treatment O&M cost. So there's this range of how much you can afford to spend for capital improvements that depend on how much you spend for O&M. If you have to spend a lot for O&M, then your rate has to go to support that as well. And so you might think of the gold line as being, maybe the high WRT or the high RO option, whereas the blue line might be less of that. Just need to show a range, but the point is that the existing rate can assume some capital improvement. So if you go back to here, you can see that at first glance you're thinking, man, we can build treatment for hardly nothing. If you look at the bottom ends of those, which are basically the alternative 1A alternatives, you can add that on without a whole lot of additional cost. Well, that's because you can absorb some of that cost in the existing rate. And that rate analysis is assuming that. So now what happens if you consider some of the other things? So these are the comparison of the alternatives, the different alternatives, and what the average rate might be over the next 25 years. It's the average of that rate. So you can see it goes up quite a bit, but it's inflated by inflation, and it's just an average rate. So again, if we go back to this picture, those averages came about in the middle of this plot, is where that mid-range rate would be. And on top of this, we've got this dash line that says, well, hey, if you decide to do the water towers, that's going to add some additional cost to that rate. And so we went back and said, well, how much would be the debt cost for these alternatives? So we got alternative 2B and 2C. Alternative 2A would be less than these costs. But then we have the core and Rushmore improvements that were anticipated by the city to be phased in, and the new two 1.5 million gallon towers to be built. So if you look at, and we utilize some guidance on interest rate and the length of the term, but the annual debt payment on each of these alternatives, on each of these, is shown in the second to the right-hand column. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the 1.5 million water towers, that's about $650,000 a year for debt payment. For alternative 2B, it's about $1 million a year debt payment. So in essence, you likely could absorb the new water towers in the existing debt, or in the existing rate. Or you could absorb the core area partial of that in the existing rate. Right? Or you could absorb a significant amount of the water treatment options in the existing rate. But when you stack them all on top of each other, and this is where the council gets to play with the ideas. When you stack them all on top of each other, if you do them all, then the rate starts to increase pretty substantively.
So you
So-
want, sorry, finish.
So this is where, from my perspective, there needs to be discussion. To me, this is more at the council level, I would suggest. But it's your, it's your play on how you actually approach that and understand, which is the higher priority? What do you need to do now? And how do you pay for all of those things? So what we're trying to show here is that, when you look at this, you go, man, we can do water treatment for hardly any additional cost. It's because you have some, in your current rate structure, you have some space to pay for stuff.
Well,
And it's a
and-
matter of what you choose to use that.
That's kind of been by design, because we've been planning for these water towers for the last 4 years. So the rates have been reflective of those costs when you do your 5-year projection of costs and capital improvements and how you determine your rate. The fact that the water towers have been delayed 2 years or whatever it is, that's where that additional absorption rate comes into play. It's not that we can, do this and, we've been overcharging people. That's not what we've been doing. We've been planning these expenditures for
Yeah.
years
And
on the water towers.
my response to that
And
is
so
that
it's-
is exactly what
Yeah.
a city should be doing.
Yes,
In addition to that, it would have been appropriate to consider water treatment as a part of the rate increase.
well, and.
Because as you start to look at how these things all pile up on top of each other,
Yes.
then it's a matter of,
Well,
Okay, so
and
what do
I
you do?
understand that, but then also we were taking into consideration, the council had been taking into consideration that the current water treatment facilities debt payment would be extinguished,
yep,
which it now has been.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have that reoccurring debt to also cover some of the costs for improvements. So it's,
Perfect.
I don't want people to think that, we have this excess, we've been overcharging people, because we've been planning for this and there has been a timeline for these expenditures. It's just, now's the time that it's coming into play,
yeah.
so.
And just to support that, what I would say is that's a great approach to be thinking ahead. And you need to be thinking ahead now of what are some of these other things
Right.
that need to be implemented.
Implemented
Because
as well.
From my perspective, you're a bit short on water treatment capacity. You've realized that.
Yeah, well, and we knew that that was coming with the end of the lifespan of the current water treatment facility. That's why we had been, it was on the schedule as soon as, to get the design
Super.
going and stuff like that. As soon as the current debt was paid off, we were never going to be debt-free.
Yeah.
We were just going to roll that into new debt and
Yeah.
expand the water treatment facility. So
And-
there has been the plan in place to do this.
Yeah.
Are we short? Possibly. We're probably just at the end of that treatment facility's lifespan is what we're at.
And you're at a great opportunity to make a decision.
Right.
Another thing that I might encourage is that, as you think about implementing this plan, that as the plan moves forward, that you revisit the growth of Brandon. Because who knows how the growth of Brandon may occur. We're estimating the growth to be out to a certain value by the next 25 years. But depending upon the economic situation in the community and stimulation for growth, it may grow faster. So
Well, if we
the
don't
i-
have water, it's not going to grow faster.
well, but if you have water, even if you
It could.
implement this plan,
Yes.
where I'm coming from is if you implement this plan, that you still need to be continuing to plan.
Yes.
And the water utilization rate may increase. If you have better water, people may use more. Or at the early phases of the treatment plant where you have excess capacity, if people relax on their conservation efforts or there's a change in how water is used, that affects how rates are brought in and affects the life of the plant. And so the encouragement, it's all great. The encouragement is once this is implemented and you make a decision and you build, that you continue to plan, you continue to look at your water consumption and look at the life of that plant so that when it comes to year 10, you're already thinking about what are we at year 20, or
Right.
you're engaging, the rural water systems nearby. It's all good stuff.
Yeah.
And forgive me if I tended to be any of the words that I've created have tended to be critical. They're not meant to be, they're to be encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So are you wanting a recommendation from the Water Development Committee to bring to the city council? Is that what we're,
That would be nice.
okay.
So my only question, go back to the, kind of the base graph. It seemed like there was about on the that one there, that between 2A and 2B, we're in that range of, less than $5, maybe $5 a month.
2A and 2B.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the difference, right, that you guys want to figure out is whether we recommend it with the WRT or not.
2A and 2B is 2B at a low rate of consumption from well number 7. 2B2 is a high rate of water utilization. So this dashed blue line represents a significant amount of additional O&M cost affiliated with using well 7 more,
Right.
right?
And
So
I don't think that was
this
ever our
2B
intention, was to use a high usage of well 7. It was always intended to blend it with the other water that we have coming in.
But if we're going to primarily use Split Rock Creek, it doesn't matter if it comes out of well 7, it's still going to be our primary source,
Right.
right? So,
I think, to me, the WRT is a no-brainer.
well, I was just curious on a monthly basis, just
Sure.
in general, if that was $10 a month per household, $20
Yeah.
a month.
Yeah, remember that is including the fact that the water rate could absorb some of the capital cost of this. So, if you want to think at a base level, it's probably about a $20 a month increase, Greg? Is that sort of what we set it on? Yeah.
Oh, seemed less than that from these pictures.
So, I mean, that's
So,
the
but you
thing.
see, the existing rate can absorb maybe $8 to $10 of it. So now it's only down to a smaller value. Right. So here we are, this is about $10. Well, assuming inflation, right? So actually, right here is where you're sort of at in terms of what the boost needs to get to.
But we're going, so 2A to 2B though, not from existing to 2B. 2A to 2B, that's
Yeah.
$20?
No.
No, that's,
That's minimum.
about-
Yeah, it's,
that-
all I'm asking is
Okay.
just whether if we have an option without the WRT versus with,
Yeah.
Right, what's that difference? That's not 20.
yeah, that's what he's saying is $20.
No, that's from right now.
No, here we go. I
Thank you.
understand the question, so I
Okay.
need to rephrase. We're back down to that 5, 6, 7.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Yeah, because I thought at $1 per thousand,
That
6,000
makes
gallons,
sense.
it should be in that $5, $6 range.
and even the high usage, it looks like it's another, what, $10 a month? So, I mean, you're going
'Cause
to
I think that's what you're
average
talking
somewhere.
there, is around $1
Yeah,
per thousand.
per
For
thousand.
what?
For
To
the
eight.
WRT.
2B,
Versus
2B2.
not- Yeah.
WRT is between $1.20 and $1.50 per thousand cost of O&M.
Yeah.
That's not
Oh, that's
necessarily
not the
what the
whole cost.
rate
The rate
increase
cost.
was.
No.
So, a community has their costs, and then they have the rate, and the rate includes other factors
Yeah.
like labor and things. So, that $1.20 to $1.50 cost was simply the cost to WRT for the media change out and maintenance.
Okay, so this is more reflective around that 5, 6 per month, per normal household.
Did you get
Per
this right,
normal
Greg?
household.
Yeah, Greg made all these beautiful graphs, that's why I'm referring to him
Mhm.
on this. And so, when you look back, and again, if you go back further in the handout that you have, you see the sources of all of this information. But then what we did was, got together with the city and tried to understand their budgeting a little bit. Well, actually, pretty extensively. Talked about how things all fit together. Looked at O&M, looked at other factors that influence the budget. So there's a fairly decent spreadsheet behind this, trying to incorporate real factors.
Well, to keep us moving forward, I would like to put out a recommendation, see what everyone else thinks. I am for doing 2B, leaving open the option of building a little bit more, so you could do the RO. I don't even want to say 2C, just adding the RO, which in essence is the 2C plan if that's wanted in the future. but go with 2B as the recommendation to the city council.
That's my recommendation, that's my
Okay.
choice to the last meeting. But I'm all for the RO down the road. I just think that in order to sell this to the community, number one, you know, the RO, yeah, you're gonna have soft water, but if it's not soft enough, are they really gonna be that happy with it?
Right.
If they still can't go without a water softener, I don't think it's gonna be as much of a benefit to their mind.
I think the WRT fixes the biggest problem that we have. It gets rid of that radium before it gets to the plant. And it's cost effective as far as everything else is looking with our other options. It's a good choice.
Yeah, I think that's what we always wondered, and I think we got our answer. It's, I mean, for the community to be generally, you know, probably not concerned with radium moving forward,
Right.
it's gonna be $60 a year.
So what do you think, Jason?
I think that's the right thing to do, because, I mean, that's really the battle that we were fighting. In regards to the RO, I'm not really sold on that yet. When you say hydraulically prepare for it, does that mean building? Does that mean just your piping layout is hydraulically? And so I don't know that we'd have to stipulate at this point, maybe let, you know, kind of design dictate on the buildings and all that. We just say, you know, hydraulically prepare for it.
Yep.
Would be,
That's the more technical term than make a spot in the
Make-
building.
Make room.
yeah, yeah. And it might, I mean, there might be other needs why they build a building and it works out fine.
I speak for the layman's.
Now, just
The garage door.
if that's the route we end up going, is building WRT now and then RO down the road, what we're really ending up with is option 2D, is the RO
Yes.
plus WRT.
Yes.
The option to get to
We're
that.
stepping
Yes.
there in a couple of steps.
Possibly.
So that's what we're saying. So
We
it,
are
Or
going there.
committing to 2B with the possibility of getting to 2D, then good point.
Correct.
Right.
so that's kind of where you would end up if you said down the road that yes, RO is a good idea. So it'd be cheaper for us to go directly to RO now than to step into WRT and then go to RO. But WRT is a smaller step right now.
So what's your option, what's your choice then? With that, having said that, what do you think?
I'm going to make the easy recommendation and say we should definitely go with the quantitative model. Because if that doesn't, if the model
What?
says that
Speak
Split Rock Creek
English.
is not a good option, then all of this is, I mean, we're going to have to totally rethink what we're doing. So I think
Yeah.
that's the first step, is
Yes.
to make sure that the water source is there in the Split Rock Creek long term.
That
Then we can start talking about WRT versus RO, because those are really the two long-term options that seem.
Okay.
So we'll put the caveat out there that we are recommending to be subject to the WSP study for recharge.
Good point. Yes.
Does that kind of encompass?
I would agree with that.
Yes.
What, I mean, we obviously want to
That's a
make
good
sure
way of
that
saying it.
the recharge is there and that it's going to happen, but is that, I mean, does that kind of encompass what we're talking about, what everybody's agreeing?
Then we also have to say, are we ruling out the Big Sioux Aquifer study? Because you could do the same study on the Big Sioux, or do we just concentrate on the Split Rock?
I don't,
From my opinion, we're leaving out the Big Sioux because we've already decided that's not where we want it to go. We want to do just the Split Rock, so why spend the money on the Big Sioux at this point?
But I think that's a good recommendation to the council, is we're ruling out the
Stop.
Big Sioux
Yes.
as an option. We're going to focus on Split Rock Creek. We're going to make sure that the water is in the Split Rock Creek. And
Yes.
then we can talk about, okay, these are the best
Yes.
treatment alternatives that
Yes.
going forward.
And I want to hear from Kevin. God have some thoughts.
Well, all right, I work for AE2S, but I'm here, when I asked to be on the committee, it predated all of this. My concern at the time was the future of my family and the future of the community. I've been here over 25 years and now almost 2 years later, I feel like this discussion in this setting, we've come so far as a community that I feel like we have a path forward. And I support recommendation as it was more clearly defined by Patrick. I think that's the right direction for our community. And I feel like now we have a path forward that we can all be confident in and understand. We've looked at a whole bunch of different alternatives, and we have a more clear idea of what the alternatives were, and those that sort of fell away, and those that didn't. So we've investigated things to a certain level, and yeah, the next step is to follow up with WSP's second level. But realistically, we're still looking at the Split Rock Creek Aquifer as a viable long-term option for us. And someday when Lewis and Clark decides to build Lewis and Clark 2, absolutely, we need to be first in line, not to be a member, but to be a customer of one of their members, whether that's Sioux Falls or Minnehaha or anyone else. Those are some longer-term alternatives that we didn't even think about as a community or know about 2 years ago.
And on top of that, I mean, 2 years ago, I don't know that Lewis and Clark were even talking about a phase 2 kind of thing. So, I mean, yeah, we wouldn't have even put that on our radar.
Well,
So,
through the conversations Dell and I have had with the city of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha Community Water Corp and Lewis and Clark, it's clear that you can't say, well, now we're set for water, because or we don't have to think about water for the future, that even Lewis and Clark, that isn't even completed yet, they're already thinking about the next thing, that by 2045, they see the need for additional capacity.
yeah.
And it wasn't that long ago. 1989 is when Lewis and Clark was incorporated, 30 years. And they're still not done, and they're thinking about the next phase. So if anyone's questioning, why hasn't Brandon done this, or why aren't we doing that, I think we're seeing the same thing regionally that we're experiencing here locally,
Yeah.
and always will.
If I could just add one more thought to the Big Sioux Aquifer. It's still there. You still have water rights in the Big Sioux Aquifer, right? And as long as you maintain those water rights, which basically requires you to continue to update every 7 years when they ask for those, they basically want a system to demonstrate the need for more water, to renew those water rights. It's not too hard for Brandon to demonstrate the need for more water. It's just a matter of where does it come from. I would recommend that Brandon stays engaged with the whole water rights activity and discussion to protect their future. And that is not only true with the Big Sioux, but also the Split Rock Creek. And that, to me, is one of the earliest things that is the next phase of the discussion, is to engage DENR on what does this look like, how to enable Brandon to preserve the water they need for their future.
The other thing that we haven't talked about today, we talked about it last time, was the connection of well 3 to the treatment plant, which I think goes a long way short term, just to make sure. I mean, well 8 is certainly going to help short term, but getting that added capacity at well 3, it makes it a little bit easier not to have to rely on well 7 if
I would
we do
agree.
ever stop getting
Yeah.
everything here.
Yeah, so if you look at
Short-term recommendation, I think that's great.
if you look at the long-term plans for the alternatives A, B, C, and D, they all include connecting well 3. And there's costs associated with that, and the cost,
That was
I just want to quick
one of
go
the lower
to
costs.
B. So you can see under capital costs, the well number 9 capital cost was, that's old now, but that was included in the overall capital cost. And source well 3 and 7, connection to the treatment plant. There's some parallel line stuff and things like that to make it all come together so you can get all the water you need for the future to the treatment plant. So that was all considered hydraulically. How do you make this whole thing out to 2070 all come to the treatment plant? So there's some parallel lines needed to get that volume here. But the point is that well 3 has been assumed to be connected in no matter what alternative you choose.
Gotcha.
Because that's a well that's sitting there that has relatively low radionuclides,
Yeah.
has some iron and manganese in it that the treatment plant can remove.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a resource that's just waiting for you to engage.
So do we have to make a separate recommendation for short-term?
From our perspective, those
included
are all
in that.
included as a part of the discussion. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Show of hands, everybody in agreement with that? All right,
We're going to be, right?
working on 2B with the,
With the option.
with the
R.
option for hydraulic preparation,
Yes.
Yeah, that.
subject to the WSP study for, with the recharge. And then also, I think everybody is in agreement with engaging the DNR with water rights, continuing those discussions with water rights. So those will be our 2 recommendations to the city council.
Do we have to, so the water rights are, should we also include, continues talking with Lewis and Clark?
That's just an ongoing.
They're doing it.
Yes,
We're good then.
ongoing
Okay.
thing
And that's
with
in
Lewis and Clark,
recommendations.
yeah,
Yep, yep.
yeah. Anything else for Dell?
Thank you.
Dell. Okay. We can adjourn. Do we need to discuss having another meeting? Do we need another meeting? Is it necessary to have another meeting? Thoughts on that? I know
I
it's
mean,
not on
it
the.
would be interesting just to hear WSP's breakdown of the aquifer when they're done, but
When they're
I don't
done?
think before that.
Okay, so if we can do that, we can maybe schedule a meeting, what, first of the year?
I would say that's going to be the earliest, maybe.
We could talk WSP, I just need to know,
Okay.
look at WSP, we're planning on including design costs in next year's budget. for the treatment plant.
Okay,
Because we're looking at design in 2020, construction starting probably 2021, and extending to 2022 to be operational in 2023. So that's pretty fast.
mm-hmm,
So before we start that, we'll need to engage WSP, and it's going to take 3 or 4 months. We should probably get a proposal from WSP for the September 3rd council meeting.
council meeting.
Yep.
So January would be realistic, you think?
Probably.
Probably, January, February?
That 3 to 4 month period, if that's the
Yeah,
case.
that's going to push it in, yeah.
We can kind of play it by ear.
Okay.
You know, they may be super busy right at the moment, so it may extend a little bit. But we just play it by ear. When the WSP report is done, we can
Reach
have all
out.
your emails.
Don't delete
Yeah, I think
us.
that's great.
So,
I think that is reasonable.
Sounds
Everybody?
good.
Sounds good. So we're on hiatus until approximately February
2020.
2020.
Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, exactly. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.